The Arizona Territory in 1887 was a land of red dust and broken promises, where the Apache Wars had left scars on both the land and the people who fought to claim it. Thomas Reed was 28 years old, a cowboy from Texas who had drifted west after his family's ranch was destroyed by a tornado, carrying nothing but his horse, his rifle, and a reputation for being fair in a world that rarely was. He stood 6 feet tall with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of sage. A quiet man who spoke Apache better than most white men because his childhood friend had been a mescalero boy before the reservations tore them apart. The other cowboys called him Silent Tom because he could go days without speaking, preferring to listen, to watch, to understand before making judgments that could get a man killed in this unforgiving territory. Thomas had heard the stories around campfires, whispered warnings about Nashotah, the Apache Queen who ruled a band of warriors in the Dragoon Mountains. A woman so fierce that no white man had ever survived an encounter with her. They said she was a ghost, a demon, a force of nature wrapped in human form. That she could kill a man with a look, and that her arrows never missed their mark. The stories claimed she had personally killed 17 soldiers. That she wore a necklace of their teeth. That she had sworn a blood oath to avenge her slaughtered village, and would never stop until every white invader was driven from Apache land. Thomas didn't put much stock in campfire tales, but he respected the Apache people's right to defend their homeland, even as he worked for ranchers who were slowly claiming that same land for themselves. On a scorching August morning, Thomas was riding fence line for the Double J Ranch when his horse stumbled, throwing him hard against the rocky ground and bolting away in panic. He lay there, stunned, his left leg screaming with pain. Blood seeping through his pants where a sharp rock had torn open his thigh, and the sun beat down mercilessly as buzzards began to circle overhead. Thomas tried to stand, but his leg wouldn't support his weight, and he realized with growing dread that he was 15 miles from the ranch house with no water and no horse in country where men died from exposure in hours. He dragged himself to a small outcropping of rocks that offered minimal shade, tore strips from his shirt to bandage his leg, and prepared to either be rescued or die trying to survive. What he didn't know was that he was being watched, had been watched for the past hour by Apache scouts who had reported his presence to their leader. The woman white men feared above all others. Nashotah appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, seeming to materialize from the desert itself, surrounded by 4 warriors whose faces were painted for war, their expressions hard and unforgiving. She was not what Thomas expected, not a monster or a demon, but a woman of perhaps 30 years. With obsidian eyes that held both intelligence and rage, her body lean and strong, her presence commanding absolute authority. Her long black hair was braided with strips of leather and small bones. Her clothing a mix of traditional Apache dress and items taken from soldiers. And across her back she carried a rifle, while a knife hung at her belt. Thomas didn't reach for his gun, didn't make any threatening moves. He simply looked up at her and said in Apache, "I mean no harm. I am injured and alone. If you wish to kill me, make it quick." Nashotah's eyes widened slightly at hearing her language spoken by a white man. Her warriors looked to her for instruction, their hands on their weapons, waiting for her command that Thomas knew could end his life in seconds. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke in English. Her voice surprisingly melodic despite the hardness in her eyes. "You speak the language of the end. How is this possible for a white invader?" Thomas explained about his childhood friend, about learning Apache not from books but from playing as boys, from sharing meals, from a friendship that had ended when soldiers came and forced the mescalero onto reservations. "My friend's name was Keel," Thomas said quietly. "He taught me that the Apache are people of honor, of strength. The land here is sacred, and that your people have been wronged beyond measure." Something shifted in Nashotah's expression, a flicker of surprise or perhaps recognition, and she spoke rapidly in Apache to her warriors. Words Thomas couldn't quite catch, but understood meant his fate was being decided. "You're a fool or a wise man," Nashotah finally said, "to speak truth to those who could kill you. Most white men would beg or make promises they have no intention to keep." She gestured to her warriors, and they lifted Thomas roughly, but not cruelly, supporting his weight as they began moving through the desert, heading toward the mountains that rose like ancient sentinels in the distance. Thomas's leg throbbed with each step. Sweat poured down his face from pain and heat, but he didn't complain. didn't ask where they were taking him, understanding that his life hung by the thinnest of threads. They reached the Apache camp as darkness fell, a hidden canyon where perhaps 50 people lived in traditional wickiups, their eyes watching the white man with suspicion, hatred, and curiosity in equal measure. Nashoda's tent stood at the center of the camp. Larger than the others and marked with symbols Thomas recognized as signs of leadership and spiritual power. The dwelling of someone who is both chief and medicine woman. She gestured for him to be brought inside, and the warriors laid him on a bed of furs, their expressions making clear they thought this was a waste of their queen's time and mercy. "Why haven't you killed me?" Thomas asked, as Nashoda began examining his wound, her hands surprisingly gentle as she cleaned away blood and dirt with practiced efficiency. "Because you speak the name of Keel," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. "Keel was my younger brother. He died on the reservation from white man's disease 3 winters ago. He was only 16 years old." Thomas felt his breath leave his body, felt the weight of that connection settle over him like a heavy blanket. "I'm sorry," he said. "He was a good friend, a good person I didn't know." Nashoda's hands paused in their work, and for just a moment, Thomas saw past the warrior queen to the grieving sister beneath. "He spoke of you in his letters," she said. "The white boy who treated him as a brother, who stood up to others who called him savage." She worked in silence then, stitching his wound with careful precision using bone needles and sinew, her face a mask of concentration as Thomas gritted his teeth against the pain. "You will stay until you can walk," she declared when finished. "Then you will leave and tell no one of this place if you do. I will hunt you down, and your death will not be quick." Over the next 2 weeks, as Thomas's leg slowly healed, he witnessed a side of Apache life that few white men ever saw, the daily rhythms of family, of community, of a people fighting desperately to preserve their way of life. Children played games that had been played for generations. Elders told stories around fires at night. Women crafted baskets and clothing with skills passed down through centuries. And Thomas realized these weren't the savages the newspapers portrayed, but a sophisticated culture being systematically destroyed. Nashoda visited him each day to check his wound, and slowly, carefully, they began to talk. First about Keel, then about the war, the injustices, the impossible situation that had turned her into the fierce warrior queen that white men feared. "I did not choose this," she said one evening as they sat outside her tent, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls red and gold. "I wanted to marry, to have children, to live in peace like my mother and grandmother before me." She told him about the day soldiers had attacked her village without warning, killing women and children, burning everything. How she had been 17 and had watched her parents die trying to protect the young ones. "That day I picked up my father's rifle," she said, her voice distant. "I made a vow to the mountain spirits that I would never stop fighting, that I would become the nightmare that haunted those who slaughtered my people." Thomas listened, understanding that she wasn't making excuses, but explaining how circumstances forge people into weapons. How survival sometimes means becoming the very thing you once feared. How war destroys everyone it touches. "The stories about you," he said carefully, "are they true? About killing 17 soldiers? About never letting white men live?" Nashoda smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach her eyes. "Some are true, some are not. Fear is a weapon as effective as any rifle. And I have learned to use every weapon available to protect my people." She confirmed she had killed soldiers, yes, but not 17, perhaps 8 in direct combat. And always warriors who were attacking Apache villages or hunting her people like animals for sport. "As for white men surviving," she continued, "you are not the first to live. But you are the first to come peacefully, injured and truthful. Others I spared were messengers, sent back to carry warnings to leave Apache land." Thomas understood he was part of a larger strategy. Even in this, Nashoda was thinking of her people's survival, using his connection to Keel as both reason and opportunity. On the 15th day, as Thomas tested his leg and found he could walk with only a slight limp, Nashoda called him to her tent one final time. Now what she said would change both their futures forever. "I want you to speak for us," she said, her voice urgent and raw. "Go to the reservation agents, to the army. Tell them that we will come in peacefully if they guarantee our safety and our rights to hunt in the traditional ways." Thomas was stunned. "You would surrender? After everything? after your vow to the mountain spirits?" Nashota's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I would choose life for my people over my personal revenge. We are dying out here. Thomas, children are hungry, elders are sick. We cannot win this war. We can only survive it." She explained that she had been secretly negotiating with other Apache leaders. They had agreed she would represent them if terms could be reached. But they needed someone the white authorities might actually listen to. "They will not talk to the Apache Queen," she said bitterly. "But they might talk to a white cowboy who survived meeting her, who can tell them we seek peace with honor. It's not unconditional surrender." Thomas agreed, understanding the weight of what she was asking, knowing it could cost him his job, or worse if other white men thought he was sympathizing with the enemy. But he couldn't refuse. Couldn't let Keel's sister face this alone. Over the next 3 months, Thomas became an unlikely mediator, riding between the Apache camps and the reservation agencies, translating not just words but intentions, building trust where there had been only hatred and fear. It wasn't easy. The army wanted total surrender. The Apache wanted assurances that couldn't be guaranteed. And Thomas found himself caught between two worlds, trusted fully by neither but needed desperately by both. Nashota met with him in secret locations, always accompanied by her warriors. And slowly, something shifted between them, a mutual respect that grew into something deeper, something neither had expected or sought. "In another life," she said one evening, as they sat watching stars emerge over the desert, "perhaps we could have been friends, perhaps more, but this war has stolen that possibility from us." Thomas felt the truth of her words like a physical pain. "The war will end, Nashota, and when it does, you'll have the chance to be something other than a warrior queen. You'll have the chance to choose your own path." On a cold November morning, Nashota led her band down from the mountains, not in defeat, but with dignity, meeting the army representatives with Thomas at her side, negotiating terms that would allow her people to maintain some semblance of their traditional life. The newspapers called it the taming of the Apache Queen, but those who were there, who saw Nashota's bearing and heard her speak, knew it wasn't taming but a strategic choice made by a leader who loved her people more than she loved war. Thomas stayed on the reservation as a liaison, working to ensure the promises made were kept, fighting the corrupt agents who tried to cheat the Apache, becoming a bridge between two worlds that desperately needed understanding. Years later, after Nashota had married an Apache man and had the children she'd once dreamed of, after Thomas had started a small ranch that employed both Apache and white workers, they remained friends, proof that even the deepest wounds could begin to heal. "They said no white man survived meeting the Apache Queen," Thomas said one day, as they watched their children play together in a world slowly learning to be less cruel. "But the truth is, I didn't just survive. I was changed, made better for having known you." Nashota smiled, the warrior queen's hardness softened by time and peace. "And they said I would never stop fighting until every white man was driven from our land." But what they didn't understand was that true strength lies not in endless war, but in knowing when to choose a different path, a harder path, the path of building something new from the ashes of what was lost. And in that moment, sitting in the shade of a cottonwood tree with their unlikely friendship standing as testament to the possibility of reconciliation, they both understood that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating our enemies, but from finding the courage to see them as human, to share space in this vast land, and to write a different ending than the one history seemed determined to give them. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.